National Park, West Bengal. May I now request President FICCI to make his formal welcome remarks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are absolutely delighted to have with us Honorable Finance Minister and Mr. Bajaj. We are extremely pleased that Madam Minister is gracing FICCI's National Executive Committee meeting. It would have been perfectly normal, Madam Minister, if after what would have been an intensive budget preparations and an extremely hectic post-budget week, you had decided to take it a bit easy on a winter Sunday afternoon and maybe also grab a siesta. But you are with us. We are extremely grateful and thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for the Honorable Finance Minister and Mr. Bajaj. Madam Minister, last year the budget was under very challenging circumstances. However, we believe that many times turnaround is a wee bit easier than sustaining high performance. Thank you and congratulations to you and your team for presenting a growth-oriented budget and without falling prey to populist measures. The challenges around us are many and varied. There is volatility in oil prices and in other commodities, looming interest hikes and tapering in the developed world, geopolitical tensions, the threat of new COVID variants remain, and we have our own challenges of spurring private consumption, creating more livelihoods, and ensuring inclusive growth in our country. Framing the budget under such a complex environment would not have been easy. However, the measures you outlined aim to address both the immediate and long-term challenges. We see a clear intent, the right proposals, and matching allocations in many areas that would contribute to making India a modern, developed, and an inclusive nation. While there are many lenses through which one can look at the budget, we analyze it using the 3 R's framework: recovery, relief, and reforms. Our current state of economy demanded a massive growth push via higher government expenditure. While purists would have liked to see a deeper cut in fiscal deficit, you choose to go for the growth. The 2 numbers from the budget that are etched in everyone's mind are 7.5 and 35. Never have we seen such a large allocation for capex by any government, and this would set in motion the virtuous cycle of growth, leveraging the multiplier effect. The massive thrust on infrastructure, especially under the Gati Shakti initiative, is a clear call that we are building a new India. An area we would like you to give us your perspective, Madam Minister, is on how is government improving its execution prowess, i.e. speed, efficiency, and effectiveness of spend, capital productivity, or in simple terms, how do we get a bigger bang for the buck for this massive outlay? We also thank you for providing relief to MSMEs, the extension of ECLGS and the additional guarantee cover of 50,000 crore for hospitality sector will give opportunity for more MSMEs to avail this scheme. Likewise, the revamping of CGT MSE will give a huge fillip to cash flow-based lending. The budget also pushed ahead the digital economy footprint across the country. Be it the 5G rollout, introduction of digital banks, a digital platform for healthcare services, or the announcement to introduce central bank digital currency, all these measures will drive India into a league of advanced digital economies. As we build the digital economy of the future, it is important that we now also come out with a progressive personal data protection legislation that will promote innovations, treat data as a national asset while safeguarding the privacy of our citizens. We also need a robust cybersecurity doctrine and related laws so that our networks and service delivery platforms remain secure. The other pillar of development is the focus on manufacturing sector. Additional allocation under PLI scheme for solar industry, higher proportion of capital spend on defense acquisition reserved for domestic industry, focus on EV sector through a battery swapping policy are some of the timely measures. The impact of such measures can be scaled up if we continue the focus on bringing down the cost of doing business in the country, ensure regular regulatory reviews to improve the ease in doing business, and create ecosystem for a steep jump in R&D and innovations, especially in sunrise sectors such as pharmaceuticals, digitechnologies, biotechnologies, and green technologies. Research in this area entails high risk, it is capital intensive, failure rates can also be high, but returns for the nation and society of every success can be a game changer. Madam Minister, we also believe, and many of our members do say that, there is an hesitancy to lend when it comes to debts from the banking sector, which really in many ways limits the capital expansion of the industry. The budget also highlighted government's commitment towards climate action and net zero. This is commendable, and industry will work with the government for decarbonizing a growth path with necessary support by way of access to the right technologies and finance at reasonable costs. Coming to the social sector, all of us are familiar with the impact of COVID on healthcare and education. The healthcare sector needs to grow in qualitative and quantitative terms beyond the enhanced capacity seen during this pandemic. Our schools, most of which have been closed for a greater period of the last 2 years, need to be prepped up for opening in a safe manner. The higher education sector needs universities that excel in basic and applied research, but also those which offer skills-based degree. While the budget did offer support to this sector, the requirements are much larger and our ambitions should be far greater. Health and education should be the bedrock of New India. I'm sure, Madam Minister, as the country achieves sustained high rate of growth, the outlays on this sectors would see a step jump. Ma'am, we are definitely seeing stress in the rural sector, and especially on consumers who use the small unit price packs, which are the rupee 1, rupee 2, rupees 5, which clearly indicates the stress as far as consumption goes in the rural sector. We are extremely comforted by the fact that the government stands ready to provide more funds in case required, as the benefits of capex may come with a lag. Lastly, we are thankful to you, Madam, for raising the trust quotient. By keeping tax rates unchanged, ensuring broad consistency in policies, further simplifying the tax regime, and announcing measures to reduce litigation, the government has reinforced the importance of trust and faith in the private sector. In closing, I would like to thank you and your team for renewing hope and optimism. We at FICCI would continue to share ideas and suggestions for your kind consideration. With these words, may I now request you to please address our members.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanjeev Mehta, and also the members of FICCI for having me over here today. I think most things that I have to say, I've said it in the budget speech itself. However, of course, the observation which you have made now, very consistent with the kind of inputs that I had received even during the preparation for the budget. The underpinning message, of course, in the budget was to continue the policy which was stated last year. The policy prescription which was given in last year's budget, we continue with it, and that is why many of the questions which are being raised about disinvestment, asset monetization, which did not have a specific paragraph in this budget, does it only highlights the fact that because I've mentioned continuity, those were part of the continuing agenda of the government. So I didn't think there was a need for me to again specifically mention, although the curiosity on disinvestment and asset monetization continues. And we only reiterated our position on that. However, what I would seek from India Inc. is, it's time now for us to, as a as Team India to rise. We are at such a juncture where revival of the economy is very clear. All of us say it, see it, and also feel it. We are observing it. May not be equal everywhere across the board, but yet it is observable. And it is this revival which makes many of the observers of the Indian economy who are not probably within the country also to agree, saying yes, this recovery is therefore going to place India as the fastest growing economy among the larger economies, and that would continue even the next fiscal. But if that is being observed and that's being recorded, to ensure that actually it indeed happens, it is all our responsibility. And I would therefore call upon the India industry leadership, India business leadership, to ensure that India doesn't miss the bus this time. Post the global financial crisis, and also the way in which, for whatever reasons, I'm not getting into a slugfest on whether that was right or not, but indeed the outcome showed that an opportunity was missed, in that the measures taken at that time to ensure that liquidity was available, ensure that the tap which was available, open and running, was not shut at the proper time, and as a result India became one of the fragile 5 economies. The taper tantrum was not absolutely well addressed. It wasn't addressed at all. As a result, we missed out on one big opportunity which was available at that time. But now, with the RBI and with the government working together, very much keenly observing what is going on in the global financial ecosystem, and also keenly watching what is happening with the US Fed, I think we've also learnt the lessons of the last crisis which Government of India faced in 13-14. We'll be able to, I think, confidently say that we are fairly watchful of what is happening, and as regards the global strategic developments, as regards the Fed's decisions, and as also regards the global inflationary pressures. We are keeping a very close watch, and I can assure the leadership here that we shall not allow the Indian economy to suffer for want of preparations. So with that said, I think the opportunity has to be for all of us to share, the responsibility has to be for all of us to share and ensure that this time India would definitely leap forward and reach such growth levels, sustained growth levels, that before India is 100 years, subsequent to the freedom that we obtained from an imperial ruler, we should make India stand out as one of those 21st century well-developed, absolutely endowed country. So towards that, my request would be for you to see and also seek as many clarification as you would want from the Ministry of Finance as and when you would want it, to ensure that the blueprint that this budget gives you, the track that it has obtained from and continues from the last budget, giving ourselves a twin track towards India at 100 for the next 25 years with a futuristic look, also highlighting the sunrise sectors in which Government of India will be facilitating with the convenient policies, those sunrise sectors which have a global leadership potential. I would invite the Indian industry to take a keen interest to see what has been said in the budget and what is that you need to know more, and draw upon the synergy between the government and the private sector, so that sunrise sectors, be they renewable energy, be they digital, various modes of digital modernization, whether it is payments, whether it is integrating on certain industrial advancements, whether it is looking at artificial intelligence giving us a lead in manufacturing of drugs and pharma products, whether it's genome mapping, whether it is looking at drones being used in the rural areas, whether it is the space technology, where we are launching mini and also medium-sized satellites for private participants, not just for government to government, where we've opened up for startups to engage in all these fields, where we are investing a lot in R&D in certain areas where private sector can also benefit from it. So the path is more futuristic, and I think it's very clearly going to give the advantage to India to be able to decide on the global digitized world's policies, be it in fintech area, be it in technology per se, be it in pure science, be it in space, be it in also the digital world of very many applications, even for that matter, the visual and also the gaming, which children and the youth find very engaging. So the opportunities are opened up, described, and also government's commitment for support in policy and support where it is required for funding research. So I call upon you to show the leadership and also to capture the moment so that India can move forward in the next 25 years and provide our future generations such an India that all of us can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. You delivered to the nation a very pragmatic, growth-oriented, futuristic budget. And your statement today has further reinforced this opinion. While the budget was a very clear, unambiguous statement from you, but it has given a lot of food for thought. And some of our members would therefore like to raise a few questions. So if, with your permission, may I invite the questions, and you may consider responding in individually or collectively, howsoever you may sort of. Okay, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. So I will even invite from people who have joined virtually, and I will go to the office bearers first. So Mr. Anisha, MD of Mahindras and Vice President FICCI. If you are there virtually, sir.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes.
Yes. Honorable Finance Minister, the Finance Secretary Sitharaman, and colleagues. Honorable Finance Minister, compliments to you on the budget. It really builds a strong foundation for the future, with a focus on infrastructure, sustainability, and inclusive growth, while maintaining fiscal prudence. The point I want to address today and seek your thoughts is with regard to CapEx. The focus on the CapEx-led strategy will alleviate the supply crunch and also address the issue of job creation without adding to the inflationary pressures we are seeing today. This will create a multiplier effect on the economy and jobs. However, our biggest challenge will continue to be how well we execute on the CapEx plans. As we look back at F21, CapEx spend was 50% of what we had budgeted for. In fiscal 22, we are at 3.1 lakh crore by the end of December, out of the CapEx target of 5.95 lakh crore. So how could we ensure that this CapEx funding is front-loaded to create a greater stimulus in the short run? There are various programs that have been outlined. Would it make sense to have an umbrella group, an empowered group of secretaries maybe, reporting to the PMO or to your honorable office that can help front-load the execution and help deliver the stimulus to the economy?
I'll go to the next person, Mr. Sudhir Jalan, past President FICCI.
Madam Finance Minister, taking advantage of my seniority, I am going to be a bit frank with you. When you took over, most of us were quite skeptical of what we are in for. But as the pandemic hit, you changed gears beautifully and got into top gear. You have changed your stance to growth and growth and growth. And I see no impediment to it, but in case the revenue doesn't go up sufficiently. And here I have two small suggestions to make. The economy is doing well and the revenue should do well, hopefully next year also. But one, the base of taxation has to be increased willy-nilly sooner than later. And secondly, I'm a bit disappointed with the very low figure of disinvestment of 65,000 crores for the budget. We should not give up and have to come up with a better figure, particularly with BPCL and LIC on the cards. Thank you.
Mr. Y.K. Modi.
Thank you very much. Madam, I think you have been emphasizing about the participation of India Inc. into capital investments. Most of us around the table are very, very keen. The demand is there. There are two issues which I want to raise. One is that the government has been promising, you had promised in last two budgets about foreign listing of Indian companies to be allowed, but somehow it is not getting the last bit of permissions needed. Second thing is that for medium scale industries, those who are interested in investments, risk capital is available, but debt capital is not. No bank, as the President mentioned, is willing to fund any capital expense. They say only for working capital we'll give you loan, not otherwise. So either these banks give us loan or an institution of the government like IDBI used to be there, or you have made one infrastructure lending institution, something like that for medium scale industries, say up to 500 crore loan is where available on viable projects. Because no project can be put on 100% equity. It needs both equity and debt. So my request would be on these two fronts. Thank you.
Ms. Nirmala Kidwai, past President FICCI and Chairman Advent Private Equity. She's joined us virtually.
Nirmala ji, Tarun ji, thank you so much for spending this afternoon with us. I want to come back to the CapEx points which have already been highlighted, and of course congratulate you for setting aside such a large chunk therein. In our interest in not just ensuring that the CapEx budget gets met completely, as both Sanjeev and Anish have pointed out, but also to ensure that we can get that multiplier effect of demand and consumption through it, I wondered if you could share with us if there is indeed stress within the CapEx budgets to maybe deploy the monies in areas like sanitation, for example, where, you know, the Swachh Bharat mission, as per a UNICEF study, 2014 to 19 created 75.5 lakh jobs. So some of the CapEx expenditure that tends to give more jobs, therefore more demand, therefore more consumption, maybe more benefit to the rural areas, would that be an area of focus as you look at deploying the CapEx money? And the second question I had is on the sovereign green bond. I think this is an amazing step, absolutely the right one. When can we expect the issue? Thank you.
Dr. Jyotsna Suri.
Namaskar, Honorable Finance Minister, and thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I'm representing the travel, tourism and hospitality industry, which arguably all of us understand has had the most negative impact due to the pandemic. Madam Minister, our biggest problem is liquidity, and you have addressed it. You've given us the ECLGS, which was a welcome move. My request is that the moratorium should be for 2 years and the payback 4 years, because it's too short a time for anyone to take advantage. People who have taken the ECLGS 1 are already paying back, and they don't have any income to be able to compensate for that payback. So a review on that would be extremely helpful. You also allowed us the restructuring. Now, the restructuring came with very stringent covenants, and we were to meet with 5 ratios by by 31st March 22. These were pushed down. 4 of the ratios were pushed down to September. But the most important ratio, which is your total net worth versus liability, is still sitting on March 31st. Ma'am, we have borrowed money from the banks to pay back the banks, so our liability automatically has increased and our net worth has automatically gone down. How can we meet this ratio on the 31st of March? Now, this was all done when we had the first wave. I don't think anyone envisaged the second and the third wave. So my request is that all these 5 ratios should be pushed down by 2 years, and my request is to take them up to March 24 and the payback period to begin from December 24. What this will do to us is it will give us time to stabilize. Otherwise, there are going to be NPAs, there are going to be distress sales, there's going to be closures, and most importantly, huge job losses. And I think if this could be done for us, it would be extremely helpful, because this is, I'd like to use your word, this could be a sunshine sector. Once it is standing on its own feet, hospitality can really contribute to the GDP of this country, besides providing endless jobs. Last thing, ma'am, is that we have a benefit scheme called SEIS, and this is for basically the smaller tour operators. There's a cap that has been put on it for 5 crores. Request is to please remove that cap. That's the only incentive these operators have. Thank you so much, ma'am. And if you give us permission, and if your time permits, we're very happy to come and have a small interaction with you, because there are several other elements which we could share with you and take your advice on. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Mr. Rashesh Shah is also virtually present.
Thank you very much, Honorable Finance Minister and Mr. Bajaj, Revenue Secretary. Thank you for being with us today. Ma'am, I must compliment you on a very impactful budget. I think this is one of the most straightforward and direct budgets we have seen for a long time. And in the shortest possible time, you, I think, delivered the most impact. I think the one word that comes to my mind for this budget is conservatism. It looks very conservative on your estimates on tax revenues, on disinvestment. All are a lot more conservative than what we have seen in the past. Also, you have taken a lot of costs like the Air India cleanup and others. So there is a feeling that the government has a little bit more room to spend, or also reduce taxes for the common man, for the Aam Aadmi, especially to boost consumption, because we are seeing that consumption and private capex are the 2 wheels of our car that are not working. Exports have started working, government capex have started working, but consumption and private capex still need a boost. So if required, we would request you, and I think you will consider tax cuts for the middle class or any other measures to boost consumption going forward, only if required, because I think you made an assumption on growth, but if there is a little bit more extra impetus required, we would want you to consider that. Thank you very much.
I'll go to Mr. Sandeep Somani now, please.
Honorable Finance Minister, thank you for, I'll join my President in complimenting you on this budget. Very straightforward, very growth oriented, and you walked the talk. You told us 2 years ago that you're looking at growth for our nation, and you've continued to focus on that. So we're very thankful, Honorable Minister. My request is, ma'am, on one matter, we will need the intervention of your good office. And there was some news on the Economic Times covered today that you've had some interaction with SEBI. We have, of course, represented to them many times. Ma'am, the way India has evolved, most of the big companies are family run. Most of the big companies, middle-sized companies, the bulk of them are, chairman, managing director, they're family members. And whereas we don't oppose in corporate India the separation of the posts, what the Uday Kota committee did not say is that the chairman and the managing director or CEO cannot be relatives. This clause by SEBI is causing deep distress in corporate India, ma'am. And Honorable Minister, we would be very happy if your office could intervene in this matter, because it is causing deep distress in corporate India. Thank you.
We'll now turn to Mr. Dinesh Kanabat, mentor of our Taxation Committee. Yes.
So first, thank you so much for no new taxes, something which is straightforward. This is probably one of the most benign finance bills that I have seen in a long, long time, and thank you so much. At a point of time when the economy is recovering, the temptation to introduce new taxes would have been immense, and thank you for avoiding that. I had just one point and one observation to make with regard to some of the amendments which have been made in the finance bill. This government has been very categorical that you would not like to bring about retrospective amendments. And yet I see 3 amendments, very important amendments being made, one of which is directly retrospective and 2 of which are pseudo-retrospective. The first one, which is retrospective, is with regard to education cess, health and education cess, whether it is tax deductible or not. Let me tell you that personally as a professional, I believe that it ought not to be deducted. That's not the issue. The issue is really we have had court judgments which say that this is tax deductible, and we should allow the law to take its course and avoid this temptation of going back and making a retrospective amendment with effect from 2005. It just sets the expectations which were raised back to say that yes, this government will never be retrospective. We then have 2 other amendments, ma'am. One is to section 14A, which is with regard to deductibility of interest on investments income, where dividend and capital gains is tax free, and section 37 with regard to expenditure on certain payments. And again, while both of these amendments have been made with effect from 1st April 22, that is 22-23, so in any event, both of these are 1 year retrospective. And this is a new trend which I am seeing in this government. This was not seen earlier, that amendments are being made with effect from 1st April 22. So the expenditure during the year gets impacted. People would have made payments of advance tax on a particular basis, that gets impacted. So that is first. And second is the way the amendments have been made. It is to say that we believe that the law, we clarify that the law means and always meant something different from what it said today. Now take the case of section 37.3, where we are talking about payments which are made presumably by the pharma sector to doctors, etc. Again, I'm not supporting the deductibility of such expenditure at all. All that I'm saying is if a matter has gone all the way to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court has interpreted the section in a particular manner, should we now go back and say that we are clarifying that the law meant something different? And I think we should again avoid that temptation. Same thing with section 14A. This temptation ought to be resisted. We should make things prospective, and prospective from the next year, that is from April 23 and not from April 22, ma'am. Finally, ma'am, this section amendment to section 37 could cause some issues. For example, it says that any payment made for violation of a foreign law or a regulation will be treated as non-deductible. There are times, for example, when Indian companies face litigation overseas and they settle those litigation, whether it is for IP infringement or whatever else, where there is no litigation happening, no guilt established, it is simply a settlement so that one does not undergo a prolonged litigation. Bringing such expenditure within the ambit of section 37 should be avoided. Thank you, ma'am.
Let's take a break.
I think From across a few members, this concern about how will you, it's welcome that you've spent or allocated or laid as an outlay so much money for public expenditure, but are you going to be able to execute it? That's come out from a few of you. I think last year when we increased it, and last year we increased it by about 34%, I think, and came up with a sum of 5.5 lakh crores, and in that, I think we've reached about 5.54 was the target, 5.51. If by 31st of March we come to that, yes, we'll reach 5.51. And that is despite the Omicron and despite the fact that when that budget was given, it was given in February, April, we had the second very intense wave. So, despite this, we were able to reach that kind of a figure. So the increase given this time is also very clear in the fact that the capacities of the department and the ministries to be able to absorb that much and spend them have been taken on board, and we are confident that we'll be able to reach unless some unforeseen major event happens, and God forbid. More importantly, we've almost given 1 lakh crore to the states. Just to draw a parallel, and I think the Finance Secretary has also been talking about it in 1 or 2 places where he's been post-budget asked this question, that first when we gave 10,000 crores, states executed them, fully utilized them. Then when it was increased to 15,000 crores, again it was very well absorbed and utilized. And states normally do have some projects in the pipeline, and most of which are infra related. So the capacity for the states also increase, particularly when you're asking them to spend on capital expenditure. And the need of the hour is also for the states to have money in their hands. So it serves both the purposes of creating assets and also giving states some little breather in terms of having some money for capital expenditure. So we are sure that we'll be able to meet that target. And I think the first speaker also asked, Mr. Shah also asked the question, can there not be a centralized coordinating committee or so? One exists and it continues and it monitored the last time. Committee of Secretaries exists. The Cabinet Secretary himself monitors it, and sometimes we ministers go and join it. I sit and oversee some of the outcomes of these meetings. So that will continue to ensure that there is close monitoring, execution happening in time, and so on. A very senior member, Mr. Jalan, cautioning and rightly cautioning us about what if the revenues don't improve, and why is it that your disinvestment has not really generated the targeted revenue. Right concerns, and I fully take it on board, but I think I would go more on the upside, being prepared for the downside in case anything happens. But the if all factors are taken on board, I think more revenue coming is what we are working for. We are also making sure that all the loopholes are plugged, all the leakages are arrested, and therefore I don't see, and of course the larger attempt to widen tax base is also going on, and therefore I don't see revenue falling. There can be ups and downs, but I think we are ready to meet the contingency. Disinvestment, I don't want to give a naive answer, but selling something of value, and not just for the government, but I'm sure you in your own businesses, don't very quickly or hastily take a decision to sell things which can, require a lot more attention. and in the government it's all the more. But this question I want to, in a way, suggest should be absorbing the fact that we have cleared the Air India. NINL has found its buyer. LIC IPO is soon to happen. So things are moving. The market may be good, and by logic lots of people may say you should have sold it yesterday. But it's probably not that way that the government works, because at the end of the day I'm answerable in the parliament, I'm answerable to the CAG, the CVC, not just the political executive, the permanent executive is very conscious. And let's not forget, some cases have been revived by people seeking justice, whatever, even after 10, 15 years of a issue being settled. So there is a sense of caution which I want you to appreciate among the bureaucrats also, that nothing should be later found wanting. So they do take their extra precautionary care, and I would rather go on that route than push them over to speedily conclude. Yes, I'm interested in finishing the commitments given in the budget, last year's budget, which I didn't specify again in this year's, but we are moving ahead on the disinvestment. And the target given this time is more realistic, and I would want to achieve it, and it's not an underestimation. And I shall not give up. Mr. Jalan, you can be sure. You said don't give up. No, we are not giving up. We will continue with the disinvestment. I fully take Mr. Modi's comment on the debt capital not being available, but we have now established the National Bank for Funding Infrastructure, the NABFID as it is called now, and that should now be available for action. I'm sure Tarun will add further if there's anything more on it. I fully recognize that the banks have not been generous with the debt capital, but we are trying to settle that bit with the investment finance institution and also somewhat the large banks to take the pressure. I think sort of in the first question, the response to the first question itself, I had addressed the concern raised by Naila Kidwai. We will meet the capital expenditure outlay which has been given. I take cognizance of the fact that you observed that there could be some stress in the rural areas. Have we made any provision for that, and are you taking care of providing funds for programs like the sanitation Abhiyan? Of course, every program which is listed out in the additional books which come with the budget speech have been provided for. The impact that sanitation has is something which everyone, inclusive, in fact, first with the Prime Minister and inclusive of the Prime Minister, all of us do recognize that it has a big impact on the health of women, children, and overall health of the families. And therefore, sanitation Abhiyan is something which will definitely continue with whatever fund it requires. And other than that, of course, any rural stress that it may be, whether it is in the form of giving the dole on, job guarantee, all that is being provided for. Job guarantee program anyway is a demand-driven program. So if there's more demand, we give more. And thank you for the observation on green bonds. In the meanwhile, if Tarun wants to add something, I'll go over to Jyotsna and others who have said anything till now. Anything for you to add? Jyotsna, I must thank you because you have repeatedly met me during the previous budget preparation and also this time, highlighting the hospitality sector, particular difficulties that you have had. And I've recognized that in my speech, saying that sector, the hospitality sector, has had a particular difficulty. They've just not even possibly had a chance to raise their head in terms of revival. And that is why a 50,000 crore sovereign guarantee enabled funding is provided through the banks. But I think what you've raised today is a far more existential question of 5 of the parameters hitting you and one of them really going to hit you by 31st of March. What I can instantly probably tell you is I will hold a meeting with you and the bankers together. You and the entire hospitality sector who want to come over, I will have my office fix up a time, call the banks also, so that we can arrive at something which the industry can, find a breather and also survive, if not prosper subsequently. I'll soon organize for a meeting in which all of you all can come and talk to the banks in my presence, and we can sort that out. Particularly on the question of restructuring, which was very severe, you said. Mr. Rashesh Shah had raised the issue of middle class, some tax cuts. I've heard him. I think on the middle class, I have given too many replies between the speech and today. So, and I belong to the middle class as well. So, if that's of any consolation. Mr. Somani, I think on the SEBI Uday Kotak's report and also on the family-owned businesses, the board, the MD relationship, no relationship, that issue I have conveyed to the SEBI. As I said, they're a regulator. I can't cross the line. I can only indicate. Tarun, anything for you to add? Of course, I've not come to addressing the issue you've raised, but on Mr. Dinesh Kanabar's suggestion related to the retrospective tax, it's very parliamentary to constantly say it's an amendment. Yes, it could be an amendment, but it's more sort of an explanatory amendment, where you touched upon it when you were talking about the second, which you said it's an indirect kind of a retrospective, even when you speak about the education cess. Retrospective it is because, contrary to the legislative intent, if you have, and I'm not talking about all courts, some courts coming up with a verdict which is contrary to the intent of the legislature, we need to come with an explanatory amendment, and that's what it is for the education cess. But of course, Tarun, you can go into the details on 14A and also on the 37.3.
Thank you, ma'am. On Ms. Suri's point, ma'am, you had also met me in the pre-budget discussions. This is also an RBI issue. So, while I was waiting for the FM to start the meeting, I was told that you have also raised the issue with the RBI. So I think I'll encourage that you should continue to do that, as Madam is indicating. I think RBI and SEBI are independent bodies, so we'll also take it up in that meeting, but I think you would need to do that. On the points that, before I come to Mr. Dinesh Kanbar's point, I'm thankful to Mr. Jalan. He says revenue should do well. I hope your words come true, because that is what is going to see us through this year. And revenues have done well this year. So I always say that in the Department of Revenue, we'll do well only if the India Inc. does well. So I hope that all of you do well and pay more taxes so that we can do our capital and the other expenditure. Mr. Kanbar, I'll answer you in this manner. I see a lot of people sitting here, they're big industrialists. If any one of them says that yes, cess and surcharge is an expenditure and not after the line issue, I will not say anything. Basically, while two of the courts have said something, there is another tribunal that has come heavily on the other side. And tomorrow we might have a situation where income tax itself becomes a tax, becomes an expenditure. So I think we really need to go And I would say that it is all fine to say all these things. All these have major impacts. I don't think the FM or the government will be able to do expenditure that they are planning to do if we get into these kind of issues, and especially with India Inc., which all of you believe. The chartered accountants came to us before our meetings, before our budget, and they told us this is something very strange that order has come. You need to rectify it. So I think you should accept it gracefully that this is there. On 14A, the foreign law issue, I think in the Indian domestic we already have a provision that if there is a violation, that expenditure is not allowed. And suddenly we find that the same clause, if it applies to a foreign country, then that expenditure is being allowed. So I'm sure what is not allowed, and I would rather say that what happens in our country, I'll give a preference to allow that rather than what happens. So if you do a compromise, if you do some kind of a payment for penalty outside, so we have brought the law equal in the domestic territory and the foreign territory. I'm sorry, I am not a practitioner, a CBDT officer or a chartered accountant, so I don't know section 37 if you're saying the clause that we have brought on the benefits. Is that the one?
So the limited issue on both. So first, even on education says I totally agree with the proposition that it can never be deductible. And I don't think there ought to have ever been a litigation. My limited request was that the moment we start making retrospective amendments, we start not allowing the law to take its own course and I think all that I'm looking for is a comfort to say this was a one-off exception and is not something which the government is looking at. And on section 37, I agree with you that what can't be done in India can't be done overseas. My limited point was that there are settlements which happen overseas by buying peace and not getting into prolonged litigation. That ought not to be hit as an offense because it's not really an established offense, it's only settlements.
Just 1 minute. May not be a bright question to ask, but if you don't allow retrospective correction and for something which existed before, it went to court, the court has given you an order, so there is a phase when the court's order is in place, and after that we have done the explanatory correction, and if we don't do it retrospective, isn't there a hiatus of a period where the same thing is being treated differently? And is it justifiable under the law to treat everybody equal? That hiatus. So that sets a precedent for anybody else to say, oh, the government has come with a law now, let it run the course. After 1 year, I go to the court and get a favorable order by some coincidence. And what happens every time the government deals with a period of hiatus where the courts have intervened? And also your taxation manual can be adding extra chapters for, if it is 2021, there is a hiatus. It will be a headache to execute. And therefore, please, let that word retrospective not make us sit up and blanket say nothing retrospect. There are times when you have to be retrospective just so that we are being fair. It is not to go with any other intent.
Appreciate.
I will only like to add something as to what we are seeing, the actual practical situation and why we brought. In two cases, if it happens, the government has done a retrospective taxation abolition in the August amendment. So I as Revenue Secretary and FM as the Finance Minister went and told that 8,000 crores going back to these companies for a country, for a sovereign, it's not an issue. That should not be an issue. Issue should be what we should do. In a similar manner, while all of you are chairmen, managing directors or CEOs, your CFOs and finance officers are now taking this additional claim in the court saying that that order has come, please give me a relief. So I would say that needs to be checked. It is my humble request to the India Inc. also that if some order like this comes, which with your nodding I find that all of you agree that it is something which is a very strange order, you also need to take that restraint. So that's all I would say. But nothing more to add. Ma'am, we appreciate we've taken more than the allocated time, but if you permit, we can go to the second installment. Dr. Sangeeta Reddy, she's virtually has joined us. Ma'am, are you there?
Good afternoon, ma'am, and may I add my congratulations to those of my colleagues in the Presidium and other senior members. We are indeed enthused by the continued focus on growth, by policy consistency, by messaging of trust, and your today's comments on how we must do this together. And we truly believe it is our joint destiny. Ma'am, I just want to ask a very brief question on a potential aspect which I believe we would be very happy to come and spend more time on. One of the potential sunrise sectors that you referred to is the whole aspect of medical value travel or medical tourism, because India has once again proved its capability in terms of how it can perform on the medical arena. And the fact is that the world is truly seeking better healthcare. So this has the potential for further focus, budgetary allocation, multi-ministerial coordination as well as required. But this indeed has the potential to be a multi-billion-dollar industry. So may I draw your attention to this and request a special focus in this area. With that, thank you very much.
I'll go to Mr. Pranav Satya, Chair of FICCI's Taxation Committee. Mr. Satya?
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, so of course, at the outset, like many other speakers, I would like to commend and compliment the outstanding budget. It signals on the one hand stability, continuity, clarity, and certainty. On the other hand, it's also immensely visionary and forward-looking. One of the points that we thought probably could be considered is the kind of compliance burden that is of late being placed on taxpayers. We commend the government's efforts to ease of doing business, ease of living, and at the same time, we appreciate the need for expanding the tax base. But some of the provisions in relation to TDS and TCS, for example, in the current budget, the introduction of 194R, which talks of a 10% perquisite 10% deduction of tax on business perquisites and benefits, needs a lot of clarification because it might otherwise put a lot of onerous burden on taxpayers for withholding taxes at source, and at the same time create a lot of uncertainty for taxpayers as to what should be and should not be regarded as a benefit or perquisite. For example, if a soft drink manufacturer provides refrigerators with their logos to retailers, would that be regarded really as a business perquisite taxable in the hands of the recipient? If so, whether there would be depreciation allowed to the retailers on that, or just the refrigerator would be regarded as taxable income? Is this really a perquisite or benefit at all, or for the benefit of the soft drink manufacturer that he is providing to the retailers? How the perquisites and benefits are likely to be valued, and so on. So for example, if some of these clarifications are provided, it would ease the compliance burden and make things far more clear and bring about certainty and reduce litigation for various kinds of businesses and taxpayers. Similarly, in last year, we had this 194Q and 206C, which talked of a 0.1% TDS on purchase of goods and sale of goods, TDS and TCS respectively. We do understand that the primary objective of this might be to really collect data rather than collect revenues. And if the idea is indeed such, then we would request a consideration of the fact that much of this data may in any case be available because of the GST databases, and in any case are populated in the 26AS itself of taxpayers. And will this immense amount of extra compliance burden really be required? And in most cases, it may not really be required, especially where a person is registered under GST and so on. So some of the steps relating to compliances, TDS, TCS, if they are considered in the light of some of these incidental data availability issues which already exist, it might really help in terms of both ease of doing business as well as reducing the significant onerous obligations on taxpayer in the areas of compliance. Thank you.
We'll turn to Mr. B.V.N. Rao of the JMR Group. Mr. Rao.
Thank you. Madam Finance Minister, congratulations. I have been in the infrastructure business since 1995, 27 years. I should say that it is a great and revolutionary budget. Some of my colleagues said conservative. I don't agree, it is not conservative. It is a transformative budget. Whether you call it CapEx for economic improvement or employment generation. I think your PM's Gati Shakti and Atmanirbhar program focus on infra spending in the Samruddh Kal is heartening. But at the same time, madam, infrastructure projects have huge cash support, cash flows are capital intensive, whereas many of our monies have locked up in prolonged litigations. Cash flow is our blood, but blood is taking out. October 29 circular by our ministry has guided many of the public sector undertakings not to litigate unnecessarily, and also encouraged them to constitute boards, committees, so that further litigations unnecessarily should not be done in casual manner with the threat of whether it is CVC, such type of thing. But this to be implemented, I think high level focus should be there, madam. I think there should be a mechanism at the Government of India level effectively to track this initiative. That is one suggestion I would like to make, madam. Second is our infrastructure projects are subjected to long-term cash flows. The rating methodology is affecting us, especially in any odd difficult times like present times, pandemic times, or in different situations. And when the cash flows are impacted, our credit rating is going down by conservative methodology. Couple of years back, you have mentioned about a special rating mechanism we are calling as earnings mechanism, ELM rating, where future cash flows of the projects which are inbuilt guaranteed shall be taken into rating methodology and assessed appropriately. SEBI and IRDA has agreed to it. Still, we are struggling with the Reserve Bank of India, but it is a budgetary declaration. I think some support we need from Government of India. Madam. Thank you very much, madam, for the opportunity.
Sunil Sanghai.
Honorable Minister, Secretary Revenue, ma'am, I would like to say that this is one of the most consultative budgets from the capital markets perspective. Even complex things like insurance surety bond, globally it's very popular. We'd never had this, and there has been a request for this for many years, and finally you have accepted that. Things like private equity and venture fund, you have accepted to set up a committee for that. So there has been a lot of consultation which has been incorporated in the budget. The second thing, ma'am, this budget could have been a lot different, and we were worried about that. The election, honestly, election could have influenced the budget, infection could have influenced the budget. But the reason why market was bright green on that day when we were presenting the budget and the subsequent day was because none of these things actually influenced the budget. I want to make one suggestion. As President FICCI mentioned that digital was a common thread in this budget. A lot of assets which could be digitized, you have actually picked up the currency. We talked about land, digitization of the land record. A lot of these, once it gets digitized, it will come in the capital market. There is one asset, ma'am, which potentially we can think of digitizing. Some work has happened on this, which is gold. We are importing almost 32 billion of gold, worth of gold for consumption every year, and that's a big bill. We don't produce gold. If we look at some form of digitization of the gold, as I said, some work had happened right from 2014 onwards, but I think that's another area which government can focus on, and that could be a big relief from the current account deficit also, and bringing that big asset class into the capital market. Thank you.
Thank you, Sangeeta Reddy ji, for highlighting the mental health and related budgetary allocation issues. We have consciously announced about the national mental health tele service which is going to be available, because we recognize the pandemic had created quite a lot of stress, and several families are seeking help where it can be, with a sense of privacy and confidentiality, and that is why we have come up with this. And I'm sure the Health Ministry will be moving forward with the knowledge partnership of NIMHANS, and also the technical partnership coming from the IIIT Bangalore. See, on the TDS and TCS, even the 10% on business expenditure, and also clarifications being required, I recognize that any taxation related issues, I may have quickly given a broader kind of a response to Mr. Kanabar. But on taxation, clarifications are always the best way to understand, and I'm quite okay with providing as many replies, not here so much, but I'll have the CBDT and where required CBIC to come up with a FAQ based on all the issues which are arising from the current budget announcements. However, I would suggest to Mr. Mehta, if the FICCI can put together, collate all the issues on which you would think a clarification might be required on the taxation related announcements in the budget, and pass it on to us, I'll have a complete point to point response given by both the CBDT and the CBIC, just as clarification shows, so that you're sure of what you're looking at. And if after that you still further require any more clarifications, we are willing to give that. So I would kindly request you to compile all the issues related to it, and I'm willing to have the boards respond to it. Thank you to Mr. BVN Rao for calling it as a transformative budget. We've tried to not just satisfy ourselves by saying, all right, we've given incremental changes a place for funding infrastructure. Yes, we wanted to bring in the transformative change for infrastructure, which is so required in this country and so required at this juncture in our country's growth. So I fully take that. But on the litigations which are bothering companies, I think we've taken quite a few inputs from industry, and we've tried reducing them, tried reducing frivolous appeals which can be avoided. I think the departments are quite conscious nowadays that they don't go on appealing, because otherwise they will be held responsible for what's not obtained by the government. But the principle should be that we shouldn't be a negative litigant, we should only be a facilitator if possible. So that has been taken as an approach, and there is a mechanism in place to track all the expenditure, as I said. The larger issue of the credit rating agencies dealing with companies, and also the methodology that they follow, is something which I'll have Ajay Seth, the DEA, speak to some of you all, or you can always give me the representations from Mr. Rao and from anybody else who wants to contribute in that. I'll have the Department of Economic Affairs look into it because they interact with the credit rating agencies, and that might make a difference if it so comes to it. But I'm happy to hear that the SEBI is positively inclined in the discussions, and we'll check up where the RBI is on this matter. Thank you, Mr. Sangai, for speaking about the insurance bond approach, in the sense the bank guarantee being replaced by insurance. And that was much of a input which we obtained from industry, and we ensured that we responded to that positively. On the digital, you did suggest quite a few, but I think many are missed out. This budget has so many different digital related announcements, all of which are very keenly followed by the Prime Minister directly. The digital university, digital banks, DBUs that we've announced, digital education with a digital university being spread from in a hub and spoke kind of a model. E-Shram portal to bring in informal sector workers onto a formal platform and also formalize them in the process, skilling through that, and recruitment as though they're happening in the campuses for students. Through the E-Shram portal, we are expecting to have recruitment as well. Land being, the contours being determined using drones, and also ensuring that registration of buying and selling of lands, whether you're in one corner of the country and your property is in another corner and you're selling it to the third corner where your buyer is, all should be facilitated where as it is where you are located. And these are positively the benefits of adapting to technology and its use. On your suggestion of gold, I'll have somebody from the ministry look into the details. Tarun, if you need to add anything more.
Mr. Pranav Saita raised some issues on taxation, though the FM has already replied to them. I don't know whether I should get into those details or not, but I completely understand your pain point on the 0.1% TDS TCS that was brought out in the last year, and that may have increased your compliance burden. Since it was brought out in the last year, I'm sure the finance minister will have a look in the coming budgets to see what can be done on that. On the TDS TCS of 10% that was mentioned, let me say this, that before the budget, anybody who used to come to me for proposals on taxation, I used to tell them that I'll hear everything, I'll read everything, but tell me some loopholes that I need to plug. So some of them never came back to me, but this is one of them. We found a lot of expenditure in the company's P&L accounts. It's fine, you take me and my spouse to Singapore for a nice holiday because I've done well. You have spent money which is an expenditure allowed to you in your books, but let that be the income of somebody like me who's got the benefit. So I heard Mr. Jalan telling me, which we have taken to heart, that you should increase the tax base. So these are the ways that we'll do the increase in our tax basis. So that is the other point. Though you have not asked that question, but I'll say that I think we should have done it much earlier. We have been very late in bringing some provisions. We had a provision where you could not do the stripping in units, the dividend stripping and the bonus stripping in units. So units are considered to be defined as mutual fund units. So the shares and the debt were out of it. The REITs and InvITs, though they have come recently, they were out of it. So in this budget, I think we brought that maybe more than a decade ago. It has taken us more than a decade to understand that this activity is so actively being involved, being used today not to pay taxes. So this is another thing. So we are also learning. Sometimes we may make a mistake or two, but you are there to tell us, and we'll be very open to rectify it. Thank you.
Ma'am, we have still many questions, but we appreciate your time constraint. So if you will permit, we'll send the rest of the questions to your office. But I must thank you for such a candid response, and I must thank the Revenue Secretary as well. such a wonderful interaction. It's time to conclude. So we will, naturally, the mantle will go to our Senior Vice President, Mr. Subrakant Panda, who's joined us virtually. May I request Mr. Panda to deliver a formal vote of thanks?
Thank you, Arun. It is my pleasure to propose the vote of thanks. Honorable Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman ji, Shri Tarun Bajaj, Revenue Secretary, Sanjeev Mehta, members of the Presidium, past presidents, Secretariat, both physically present as well as attending virtually. Madam Finance Minister, at the outset, I would like to thank you for taking time out to be with us today and giving us extensive time, in fact, to go over all the questions that our members have had, and for offering to interact with others who have raised issues. At the outset, let me commend you for a comprehensive, growth-oriented budget, which is high on vision. The Times, I believe, called for a bold budget, and you have done so while maintaining the underlying commitment to fiscal discipline in terms of the glide path. The growth agenda is clearly front and center, with a huge 35% hike in government capex to 7.5 lakh crores. I believe that the revenue assumptions are at least realistic, if not actually conservative, and that means that there is upside potential for the government to step in and do more if warranted. But the certainty and stability of policies as well augur well, as well as the initiatives like the green bond, the surety bonds, and the many other digital initiatives that find mention in the budget, I believe make it a transformative budget. And in that context, you are certainly working to give shape to the Honorable PM's vision of a new India. I believe that we are at a turning point with a landmark disinvestment, which shows the intent and the resolve of the government, the mega IPO of LIC coming up, and perhaps most importantly, GST levels, GST collections sustaining at a high level of 1 lakh crore plus per month, thanks to formalization of the economy as well as the plugging of loopholes. So all of these augur well, and we certainly look forward to great things coming out of the vision, which is which is represented so well in this budget. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Tarun Bajaj. He's someone who has certainly been very accessible to FICCI, and for that I'm grateful. He has been very receptive and open to suggestions, while also asking us tough questions, which to justify the suggestions that we make, and I believe that is certainly the way to go about things. Madam Finance Minister, thankfully the Omicron wave is receding, but we are confident that the deft handling of the economy that has been on display will enable us to deal with any challenges that may come up, although I hope that we have been tested, we are not tested anymore, but I'm sure that your insight, your commitment, your dedication and your passion, which is reflected in the deft handling of the economy, will stand us in very good stead. And in conclusion, I would like to assure you that the terminology that you have used today of Team India, we are completely on board with that. And as FICCI, as individual industrial houses, I can assure you that we would do whatever necessary to aid and abet the growth and development of the country. But certainly as FICCI, we are available to, and we will look forward to continue to engage with you and your team to provide suggestions, to be available to you to in any manner that you deem fit, so as to work for the greater good of the country. Thank you very much, and thank you once again for being with us and taking out a lot of your valuable time to be here today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a pleasant rest of Sunday.